Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons. Like diamonds, back again, talking about lures. We had an audience member named Wayne. He sent us an email, says, I've been fishing for a while. However, there are terms for types of lures, which I don't know exactly what they are and exactly when to use them, such as swim bait, crank bait, jerk bait, twitch bait. Tony added stick bait. We got spoons, jigs, we got paddle tails, and he suggested doing a podcast or video. So we're doing both on what these are. And just as important, when to use them and how to retrieve them. So we've got the what, like what are these things? And then we're going to have the when to use them, and then the how. So do you guys want to just start at the top? Swim bait, because that kind of ties into paddle tail too, because that's another question that we'll just knock right off the top of this podcast. Luke's holding up a swim bait. And for those listening, describe what that is.
Yeah, and Justin had one on too. So there's multiple types of swim baits, but basically a swim bait, at least the common definition, is a bait. It'd be a soft plastic that has a tail that makes action in the water. So I have one with a more of a traditional kind of paddle tail type, and then Justin has one with a tail. What will be the definition of that type of tail? That's a live target.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't really know what to call the type of tail. This back end is pretty thick, and then it tapers out here, so it just kind of thumps as you reel it through the water.
We'll call it thumper.
A thumper.
Thumper tail.
I like it.
And yeah, technically, at least that's what I learned as being the traditional swim bait for saltwater fishing. And then you mentioned, Joe, what would a paddle tail be? And that would be more like the slam shady, where it's not pre-rigged, where you're buying the tail separate from the jig heads and putting the two together, or weighted hooks. So these give you just more control over depth, right? You can put a heavier jig head to go deeper water. You can do a lighter jig head for the shallows, or a weighted hook for the ultimate shallows, and be weedless. So that's at least a lot of questions that came in are around that, seems like.
Cool. All right. So that's what a swim bait is. Crank bait. What is a crank bait?
I got one right here. This one actually is an interesting little crankbait. Basically, any kind of hard plastic that you have that has one of these lips on here. This is one that runs a little bit high. It's actually known as a wake bait. Some people do call these top waters, but I don't believe it is a true top water because it does run subsurface. But it's anything that you're going to tie on with a snug knot that you're going to do a constant retrieve with. And the action of you retrieving it and the resistance of the water against this lip that you guys can see here causes that lure to dive down, and depending on the structure of the bill. So some of these bills have a little bit more of a square shape to them. Some are narrow and a little bit longer. It's going to change the action of that lure. Generally, the longer and narrower they are, the deeper they're going to run, and the more erratic of a pattern they're going to have. If they're a little bit fatter and they've got kind of a square like this, it's going to create a short little, almost walk the dog looking action under the surface of the water. So this is one that I would use if, I find someone that wants to get on a topwater bite, but doesn't know how to walk the dog. I'm going to tie on one of these for them. And it does create kind of a top level action up there. But generally crankbaits are all going to be subsurface. And they're going to allow you to kind of work that bait in a constant motion. And it's all going to be dependent on what the structure of that bill is, how deep it's going to run, and the action that it's going to put off.
That lip plug's actually pretty cool. That's a man's plug. It truly wakes underneath the surface. I haven't seen that one in a long time, actually.
I've been catching quite a few redfish on this lately. I tied it on for some folks that, like I said, didn't know how to work top water, but it's a fun little bait. But I have caught, flounder on your traditional bass crankbaits as well, running them over sandbars. They work really well to kind of kick up some mud, get some action up on the bottom as well. A lot of people see them as bass baits, but your traditional, Rapala crankbaits can work just as well in saltwater too.
So speaking of Rapala, I have a Rapala here as well. Another lip plug.
Oh, it's a cute little trailer there on the back treble.
It's got hair in its butt. So this is an X wrap. This is a Rapala X wrap. And in kind of a segue from the term crankbait to, I guess we can almost say jerkbait, because really people in freshwater, people that fish freshwater or saltwater and regionally, there's all kinds of different names for these lures. Some people might look at that, and because it has a lipped plug, like Wyatt was saying, might think that's a crankbait. And to be technical, some people might look at it and say that it's a jerkbait, because when you reel it, you can twitch your rod and jerk it through the water. And this particular elongated style of a hard lipped plug, essentially that's what it is. It's a hard bait. It's a lipped plug lure. So you can straight retrieve it and it'll kind of go left and right. You can jerk it through the water and it'll erratically jerk left and right. That's why some people might call it a jerk bait, as opposed to what Wyatt had, which does look more like a traditional crankbait body, this kind of elongated shad, round, oval. I don't really know what shape that is. That's more the traditional shape of what people would call a crankbait. But I guess technically this could be too, right? Because it does have a lipped design and you can crank it and just get it to work through the water in the same manner. But different actions can be imparted in this type of lipped plug, and you can jerk it as well. So, I mean, it just depends on how you use it, I think.
So in the bass world, the differentiation for me that I had always learned between what you would do with this kind of lipped plug, obviously you're cranking it, and I always called those slash baits. So instead of jerk baits, I'd always been, raised that those split tail flukes, as we're going to talk on later, are your jerk baits. Those are slash baits because you're making this really hard twitch to get them through the water. So there are a lot of different names for these baits. And yes, I should have clarified a little bit earlier, just because it has a lip doesn't make it a crankbait. That action of constantly reeling it makes it a crankbait. That's where you get the best action out of it. But the one Justin was showing off right then and there, that is you're going to give it a jerk, or you're going to slash it. And it's going to create a different act. Usually those suspend in the water or they sink. These will oftentimes rise to the surface when you stop cranking them. So there's an action there as well.
Cool. Just because it's in a can and it's cold doesn't mean it's a beer, even though we all wish it was. All right. So you kind of combine the two. So to make sure we're not confusing anybody, we got the crankbait. We all kind of get that big lip, cranking down. Jerk bait. What are some other examples of some jerk baits? Some popular ones.
Or you say jerk bait or crank or slash bait? What term are we going to use?
I'm going to say jerk bait. This is why Wayne sent this email in. There's all these different terms.
It's a good topic.
I got me a slash bait. What's a slash bait? Well, depends on where you're from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the slash bait really comes from the Rapala line. It's more of a brand name that they kind of gave them. But jerk bait and crankbait are sort of the general terms there.
To jump into a jerk bait, guys, the first thing I think when we initially hear the word jerk bait, we're going to jump to Alabama leprechaun. I mean, why you've got a couple examples of them. You got two different styles of a jerk bait, two different body styles, both worked similarly, but really they're designed a little differently. Talk about it, man.
Yeah, so when I think of jerk baits, I'm generally thinking of your soft plastic kind of shad or shrimp imitator that you're going to be putting a twitch pause action into. The way that I work jerk baits pretty much 90% of the time is twitch pause or triple twitch pause or twitch pause. There's always a action in your wrist that is going to work that bait. You're basically going to jerk it up into the water column, get the attention of any fish that are around, and let it settle back down. That's the action that I'm putting into pretty much any jerk bait out there. Now, there's a lot of different designs of soft plastic jerk baits out there, but really the main one that you're going to see is the type of tail, and that's generally what's going to differentiate the action between the two. You're going to have a more darting action with a straight tail like these. I know Fathom makes some really nice jerk baits as well that have the similar design. This is the Mirror Lure Little John, probably one of the more popular, just kind of dart style looking jerk baits. You can tell this thing really doesn't look like a whole lot, but when it darts through the water, it looks like a small minnow or a shrimp that's trying to get away. With these larger split tails, these look a little bit more like a bait fish that's trying to give away. They have a little bit more action in the water. I find if I'm going to be using a jerk bait, I do prefer for it to be a split tail because it does look a little bit more like an injured minnow that's, kind of on its death throes going through the water as it's settling down. But that tail, that little kind of back end split allows it to dart through the water a little bit differently than if you have no tail on there. In fact, a lot of times what will happen is if I'm not getting a lot of bites on and I know the fish are kind of in a reactive mode where they're looking for that darting action. If they're not biting with the split tail on, I've had it where, the tail gets bit off by a pinfish and it completely assumes a different action when that split tail is not there. It does a little bit of a different dart and fish will key in on that. And so there's a couple different designs as far as soft plastic jerk baits go. But I would say the two that you're going to have are the dart and the split tail. And again, this is just the Alabama Leprechaun, Mirror Lure, Little John. These are two popular options that I've used. I've had good success with, but there's a million different brands out there in terms of soft plastic jerk baits. Luke, I know that you used the Zoom ones for a long time. Those are more of a split tail, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't used those in a while, but I'll add to that the split tail, just the overall split tail, especially if used on a weighted hook, and the reason why I use it all the time is because, as Wyatt said, it does a great job resembling an injured bait fish when you're doing that twitch pause. But looking at underwater footage, on this in particular, this leprechaun, which is green and has some gold flash, as it's darting out of the grass, it looks just like a scared shrimp. Both in how it looks, right? This little split tail kind of resembles that. Like obviously they go backwards, right? This almost looks like their antenna, and it does a great motion, and then falls again, motion like a scared shrimp darting out of the grass, and then it falls down just like a shrimp does. And that's why, in my opinion, this is like the ultimate. Where whether the fish are dialed in on shrimp or if they're dialed on bait fish, you can hammer them, which is this one lure, which is rare. Like not many lures can bridge both a shrimp imitation and a bait fish imitation. So when I was doing tournaments, literally this is all I used. We didn't have the Alabama Leprechaun at the time, but it was this split tail, 4 to 5 inch split tail jerk bait is really good. It just requires for all these types of lures, it requires the angler to do work, right? This isn't something you put on a brand new person's line and say, all right, go cast and have fun. This requires the angler actively giving it motion in the water. So that's the key thing to think about.
Except
I saw something
maybe
really cool when you were.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's a good point. Why, when you were holding up the Little John and you were holding up the Alabama Leprechaun for a split second, I was kind of watching the tail go up and down on the Alabama Leprechaun. That split tail is a different design. You kind of see one move a little more than the other. That split tail is going to create a little bit of draft. And when rigged on a weighted hook, it's going to waft, I guess is the word. I don't know. It's going to hover or float or stay in the strike zone a little bit longer. That straight tail is really erratic. So, depending on a lot of variables, time of year, species you're going for, whether they're pressured or the fish has never seen a lure, you really do choose between the two. It's super applicable. I've used the Little John in the winter months when I want a super small profile. If I'm going for big trout that are lazy and want an easy meal, that's split tail. I mean, it hovers and slows down and you retrieve a little more. So again, all jerk baits, they don't perform the same. They're all a little bit different. That was really cool.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind if you are going to be using jerk baits is to look at the front of it, right? And so you want it to be, assuming you're going to be fishing the shallows, you need weedless where you're doing a weighted hook. It has to be aerodynamic. So why, if you could hold up that Little John, the Little John, the reason why I don't use it very much is because it's a very flat front, so you can't really use it on a weighted hook. It's very good on a jig head, but only a jig head. And so the Alabama Leprechaun, you can see it's a little bit more streamlined, almost looks like a submarine, right? Versus the flat front. That flat face is going to catch the water and not make it look nearly as natural. So Little John, great on the jig head, not very good on the weighted hook. Whereas like the Alabama Leprechaun style, the more torpedo front faced one, that's good on both the weighted hook and the jig head. So just keep that in mind, because if you use a flat face one on a weighted hook, it will catch some fish, but it won't be nearly as effective.
Yeah, I definitely agree. When I've seen the Little John work well, it's when it's on a jig head. And I don't use it in the shallows much at all, just because it doesn't actually rig well on a weighted hook. I've got one here. You can see I cut it off. I didn't catch anything when it was on this weighted hook. Switched over to the Alabama Leprechaun. It's got this fold right in the bottom as well. And it's really just playing with different lures, what's going to work at different depths. And generally, I'm not going to be using a lot of jerk baits in deeper water because there's a lot of light that doesn't penetrate the surface. And jerk baits usually are going to be a sight reaction from fish. They're not generally going to feel it. There's not a whole lot of vibration that's put off by them. But if you are fishing some clearer flats, that's when I might break out the Little John. But for most of my jerkbait scenarios, I'm fishing in, clear, shallow water that's generally pretty calm. And I'm looking for a reaction bite that I can't get out of a paddletail that might spook fish off if it's really calm and clear. And I don't want something that's got too much presence. It's all about walking that fine line of something that's subtle, but not too subtle. You want it to catch the fish's attention, but you don't want to be up in its face and have something that's too loud. So it's all about playing with different profiles, different presentations. And that's why we've got all these different terms for these different baits, because you can fine tune just about everything with all the different tackle options out there.
And going back to the terms, a lot of these terms can be interchangeable. What I kind of classify jerk baits, whether they're soft plastic jerk baits or the hard bodied jerk baits, is under like stick baits, because they're basically like a stick. So you have, this is the Z-Man, the TRD, a bigger TRD. And it's a stick bait. It looks like a stick. Same with the jerk shads. They look like a stick. They don't have any kind of kicking paddle tail action. They have just that sort of stick presentation. Same thing with the hard plastic stick type of presentation. So if you really want to make it more of a general category, I would say put all the jerk baits under stick baits.
Jerk bait equals stick bait. I'll tell you another reason I don't use the Little John. Luke and I have a cousin named John, Little John. His dad's Big John. He's John Jr., John Sr. And we used to have to go to their house. And they didn't have air conditioning in their house. In Florida, mind you. And remember, Luke, we have to spend the night there in the summers, multiple nights. And I keep it at like 68 degrees in that. I keep it cold. I like to be like a bear. I still have nightmares about that. Little John having to sleep there and just sweating profusely in the middle of summer. Oh, can this fan get any faster? So I'm not gonna use Little John just because of that. If you're listening there, Little John, still love you, buddy. But man, that was a tough couple summers there. All right, so let's move on to twitch bait. Twitch bait, I believe, is next, right? Yeah. I'm getting confused with all this. We got swim bait, crankbait. We talked about jerk baits, both hard and soft. Now we got twitch baits.
Anybody have one? That'd be like the mirror lure, right?
I think Tony had one in front of him a little bit ago.
When you guys are listening, bait, everyone's now trying to find all their lures here. And
yeah, I've got two until they kind of search. It's okay. So twitch baits. The first one I think a lot of us think of is a mirror lure. The mirror lure 17 MR 18, which is the silver side, green back. Guys are still digging for it. Thank you, Wyatt. Okay. So Wyatt's got when we think of a twitch bait, okay. And yep, Luke's got one that's fresh in the package. Save him for later. We think of a twitch bait. We think of a lure, a hard bodied lure for the most part, that most of them suspend, and you twitch it through the water, and the aggressiveness and how you twitch it will determine whether it's going to, go a really heavy knock or kind of knock and walk the dog under the water, depending on if you move your rod tip really slow. And again, most twitch baits are hard, mimic an injured bait fish. They come either long and skinny, or they kind of come short and stubby, like the Meridine that's very popular. And they either float, suspend, or slowly sink. Most of them come stock with treble hooks, but some of them are coming with single hooks. I mean, this one, yeah, exactly. So you've replaced the single hooks on your mirror lure, or no hooks, yeah, and you just want to tease a fish, because we do that sometimes. And yeah, like Luke, you've got the Rapala Subwalk. They started coming with single hooks, which is great. I mean, a lot of us have changed out a lot of our hard baits to single hooks. I've got a smaller bodied olive gold one. And yeah, that's something awesome we look for to make sure, just easier for the fish, easier for us to handle. But when do you guys like to work a twitch bait? And what scenarios do you feel like a twitch bait's really going to shine?
So, go ahead.
You're on it.
Oh, before I get to that, I just wanted to show a distinction too between, twitch bait versus jerk bait. Jerk baits are going to usually have that lip on there, even though they may suspend, they may float, they may sink. With the twitch baits, you're not going to have that lip on there. So it's basically you're twitching it down to the appropriate depth that you want to fish it, and it'll either stay there, which is suspending, or it'll float up, or it'll sink. But I feel like the best times to use those are when the bite is really slow. You can actually fish them really fast. You can fish them really slow. That's the nice thing about these, except you want to be sure you have the right type of twitch bait. If you're fishing really slow, you're going to want a suspending bait, because you're going to twitch it. You can twitch it 1 or 2 times, and then it'll just sit right there in the water column. It may sink really slowly, or it might float up really slowly, but it'll keep that bait in the strike zone much longer if you're going for a slower presentation. And then depending on the depth you're fishing, mirror lure, they sell like it's a Mirrodine, but it's a little bit heavier. So it does sink a little bit faster. It does cast a little bit further. So if you're trying to fish a little bit deeper, or you're trying to fish that lure a little faster, when those fish are more aggressive, that would be the better choice. So you really have to pay attention to, the type of twitch bait it is and the type of presentation you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's funny. You can walk into, a tackle shop, and you can see that there's 15 mirror lures hanging on the wall. They all might look the same, but some might be weighted, some might suspend. And unless you read the packaging, you really don't know what you're going to get if you just grab one off the wall because it looks like a twitch bait. Justin, to touch on your question from earlier, when do I like to work them? I like using them when the fish are really lethargic in the dead heat of summer, or the really cold parts of the winter, especially for trout and redfish. When I was in the Carolinas, one of these suspending, little twitch baits with the broken glass side. Oh my goodness. I can't tell you how many trout and redfish I smacked in those back creeks that were just kind of posted up in those holes. Just twitch, pause, let it sink down. When those fish are really lethargic, something that's like really slow and you're up in their space, it just triggers like a genetic reaction from them. Other baits we've talked about, we are going to be using weighted hooks, jig heads with them. So they're going to move through the column a little bit faster, but some of these are weighted to move really slowly. These are both mirror lures. One of them is the 52 MR. This one sinks pretty fast. So I'm going to use this in the fall when fish are really fired up, but they are still keyed in on baits that are sinking and rising vertically. Just drop one. But when those
no worries, just some treble hook in your pants.
Oh yeah. But I'm having to pick them up with my feet now. Probably not too safe. But these baits work really well. Twitch baits, when they're keyed in on erratic actions, and they're typically going to be staged up in an area where they're ambushing bait. They're not searching for it. So when you start having big changes in temperature, I find fish kind of lock down in areas that they can ambush bait. They're not out searching on the flats, so they're not searching in creeks. They're going to post up on points. Usually in the spring and fall is when I start using twitch baits, and I will continue using them, in the dead heat of whatever the extreme summer or winter is. But I start using them when temperatures really change and fish kind of post up, because they work really well when fish are locked down in one spot and you're trying to pull a bite out of them. But again, there's a lot of other presentations you can give to them as well. One question I've got for you guys is when do these get called suspending plugs? Because that's another term that's always confused me. And I've seen suspending plugs referred to as mirror lures, but some people will refer to top waters as suspending plugs. It's a very confusing term for me as well. That's one I've never personally figured out.
No, it's when you actually cast it in the water. So when it's in your tackle tray, it's just a little twitch bait. And then when it hits the water, now it's a suspending plug. I'm being sarcastic. I think it goes down to, once again, how you were raised, and right. And what type.
Who calls it a plug? Do you guys call it a plug? I mean, again, I think it sounds like you call it soda or you call it pop. I mean, it almost kind of sounds like that. Really,
so the term plug really encompasses a whole assortment of lures, and I figure a plug to be a hard-bodied lure, whether it be a topwater, a twitch bait, a jerk bait, a crankbait. Those could be all considered plugs. And the term suspending just has to do with that lure being able to sit at a certain depth in the water column.
Yeah, so typically I've always heard of like this. I'm holding the Rapala Subwalk or the mirror lure, like the MR17. They all suspend, and then they're twitch baits. So I've always, at least I typically refer to them as suspending twitch baits, right? Because it's a twitch bait that suspends. And so that's at least, I think, a good way to do it, where because they're all plugs. It's not, obviously, unless it's soft plastic, but there is. So this is the Paul Brown, and so this is a suspending jerk bait that's soft plastic. So it's not necessarily a plug. So that's where it gets complicated.
But it looks like a plug.
It looks like a plug. But I was interested. I was looking at these two together, and they're like literally the exact same. Check that out.
Wow.
It's a subwalk against the Paul Brown, and it's like shockingly similar. But I really like, my new favorite is this subwalk because it comes with the single inline hooks. I can't stand using treble hooks anymore, especially with catch and release fishing, which now pretty much everything is catch and release. It's just bad for the fish, bad for us, risky for crazy Otis on the boat. So I do suspending or the single hooks. And as far as catching fish, I mean, I this casts further and catching just as many fish, if not more. But I actually rarely use them because I just prefer soft plastics. I only use them when puffer fish are bad and are wrecking my soft plastics. But I always have them handy because that's all. You never know when those puffers are going to be bad. And when they're bad, they're horrible.
So let's stay on there. Let's for now. Let's time's sake. Let's not go into spoons and jigs. That can be a whole separate thing. Let's stick on the twitch, jerk, crank, swim. So we've kind of talked about it, but we really haven't. We definitely discussed the what. Wyatt and Luke, you just kind of talked a little bit about the when and the how to retrieve. Let's talk a little bit more about the how you guys are fishing this. So you talked about when. For you, Luke, we're talking about a twitch bait. I know you own a bunch of them, but this sounds like more when your soft plastics are getting destroyed. Wyatt, you mentioned fall.
And the fish are not very aggressive.
Okay.
So they generally shine when it's a little bit slower retrieve because they'll suspend right in the strike zone, right? Whereas the other plugs are going deeper and you can't really slow down. Otherwise, it's going to be on the bottom and you're going to be snagged on the bottom. So yeah, it's when the fish are lethargic, and in my case, and when the puffer fish are too bad to use soft plastics.
And so you're doing twitch, let it sink. What do you do?
Yeah, I would say that, it all comes down to what the energy level of the fish are. Obviously, in the dead of winter, I've had
you do a survey? How do you gauge that?
I basically just sometimes I'm able to actually see the fish and I can see whether they're locked down or they're actually going after a lure and they turn off of it or they just don't go after it at all. Or, I just take what data I get from the fish that I'm catching. I'm always trying to think constantly about what I just did to get that bite. Was it during the pause? And it really helps having the GoPro on my head because I can always go back and look, but not everyone has that. So just try to be mindful of what you're doing when you get strikes. It's during the pause. Generally, those fish might be keying in. If you're using a soft plastic and it's dropping, they're keying in on the drop. That's an erratic action. Or if it's something that's sitting on the bottom, those fish might be lethargic. They might be meandering around. You really need to be thinking about what you're doing. But generally, with these twitch baits, I know we're talking about the how for these. When I'm using them is when the fish are really lethargic in, the heat of summer, the dead of winter. They're not wanting to expend a lot of calories because they are cold-blooded and their temperature is, regulated by outside sources. So they're trying to conserve energy, whether it's hot or cold. And a lure like this, when you fish it really slow, leaves them little choice but to strike it because it's, low risk and high reward. They don't have to expend a lot of energy to go after it, and they get a nice little meal. So if it's right in front of their face, I've thrown this in front of redfish that I've seen locked down in holes during the winter time that literally won't chase down anything. But when it sits in front of their face and it's got a little bit of nice wobble action as it goes down, I've let it sit in the water as it drops, because this thing will drop I think it'll drop down 2 or 3 feet before it just doesn't go down any further. I would say that I've probably had this stopped for like 8 seconds and gotten a bite as I've seen it drop in front of a redfish. I was going to let it go down as far as it would, and that redfish just sitting right up there, and then finally it pounced on it. So I would say you have to let the fish tell you what's going on, but you really can't fish these too slow. But at the same time, you need to think of efficiency as well. You don't want to be sitting there having a retrieve that takes you 10 minutes to do because you're not covering ground. Most of the time, it's more about putting yourself in the right feeding zone, which is why I love soft plastics, why I love Paddletails, because they can be fish really versatile. You can put on different weights, allow them to suspend, drop a little bit longer. You can fine tune everything a little bit more with soft plastics, I find, which is why I love hard plastics because I think they look cool, but I moved away from them over the years because they don't have a lot of versatility. You're locked into one action, one retrieve that lure was really designed for. But with soft plastics, you can adjust that weight and you can adjust your retrieve to work different columns, different speeds, things like that. But as far as, how to for these twitch baits, twitch, pause, just working it all with your wrist, giving it a little bit of a drop, and then picking it back up after a few seconds. And if you need to slow it down to get more bites, do that. But be mindful that you're not spending too much time on one retrieve. Otherwise, you're going to waste your entire fishing trip in one spot that may not even be producing.
I want to kind of address something. We get insiders, we get questions of people saying, do I twitch, pause? Do I twitch, pause, twitch? Like as if it's like a cheat code, right? Like how many twitches and how many pauses is the recipe to always get a strike? And I think kind of what we're trying to say is that there isn't a recipe when it comes to working a twitch bait. Soft plastic, hard bait, doesn't matter. There isn't a code you can put in to Twitch to magically get that 40-inch snook to bite. Because if there was, we would have all done it. We would all. And she was like, yeah, I wish I would have known that the other day. But you definitely why the fish tell you and the seasons tell you if you want a slow, heavy twitch, if you want an erratic twitch with the Meridine, if you want to slowly move it through the water and then every now and again have a light twitch. Play with it. That's kind of the fun, is the experimentation of, you could go out and the conditions could be exactly the same from one day to the next. And the fish strike lures moved totally differently from one day to the next. So there isn't like a set right way. Twitch, pause is just a general term of like, you don't have to do 2 twitches and pause. You can twitch once, pause. You can reel it straight back in, a little bit of a twitch. It's art. That's what's fun about it.
We talk about trends a lot, and I will adjust based on what's trending. So, for example, talking about twitches and pauses here. So if I'm fishing in the morning on let's say it's the winter, I'm fishing on a morning, it's been a cold night, I'm going to have a longer pause and I'm not going to make as many twitches because those fish are still going to be lethargic. If I'm fishing in the evening, I can fish it a little bit faster because it's now warmed up throughout the day. Think about what those fish are being exposed to in terms of the tide, in terms of the weather. What has it been? What is it going to be? Things like that are going to affect how quickly I retrieve a lure or how long I stop it. And that's really how I find I get the most bites. Not thinking about, okay, like Justin said, this is a cheat code that I have to do. How can I make this easy for them to hit? How can I make it a subtle enough presentation where it's not too much in their face, but it's also something they can't resist biting? It's all about walking that fine line and kind of getting in that Goldilocks zone of what those fish want without being too much and also not being too little.
It sounds like a fairy tale to me. All right, let's move on to jerk baits, aka stick baits, right, Tony? The jerk is the stick. Stick is the jerk.
Pretty much. I mean, it's just like how plugs kind of encompasses all the hard baits. It could be a jerk bait, it could be a twitch bait, and then stick baits, it can refer to, the soft plastic jerk baits, the hard body jerk baits, anything that really doesn't have a kicking paddle tail motion, in my opinion, would be like a stick bait.
So when do you use them and how? What's your secret recipe that works every single time?
Stick baits and plugs.
60% of the time.
Yeah, I'd say with the stick baits and plugs, it's going to be more of a finesse presentation just because it doesn't have that paddle on it. It's not going to have a lot of vibration aside from, the harder ones that have that lip. That's going to create more vibration. But I guess we can kind of break this up into two, soft plastics versus hard bodied. Soft plastics are going to be for more finesse. So really clear water, calm days where you need something that's not going to spook those fish. You have to work pretty slowly. That's when I'm going to go with like a soft plastic jerk shad. And my go-to retrieve with them is usually 2 to 3 twitches and then a pause. Very similar to the twitch baits, except you're working a different column of the water. You're working them close to the bottom, especially for redfish and trout. Flounder, snook will also hit them close to the bottom if the bite's really slow. So standard retrieve for me, as soon as I get on the water, I always have like a go-to retrieve, and it's going to be that cast it out, let it sink to the bottom, 2 to 3 twitches, let it sink back down. And what's really going to change is going to be how long that pause is. And it's very similar to the twitch baits too. If it's a slower bite, longer pause. If it's a pretty, fish are being aggressive, you can almost do 2 to 3 twitches, 1 or 2 second pause, and then repeat. So again, it's really going to come down to what those fish are responding to best.
Yeah, and then that soft plastic jerkbait, it's not a coincidence that you guys see us using these types of lure. I guess I should say this type of lure more often than not, because as Tony said, this is kind of the go-to, right? If the fish are lethargic, they'll smack it. You can work it slow. You can adjust the weight a little bit to cover different water columns. You can rig it weedless to get right in the structure where most of the feeding is happening. And you can even pinch off the tail. And if the bait fish are small, you can just pinch off the tail from a 5-inch jerk bait down to a 3-inch nub, and they'll still smack it. As long as it's rigged properly, it'll do some nice darting motions. As Wyatt said, even the tail without the tail will have like quicker darts versus more of a flowing, like it kind of tracks in the water when it's longer with the actual tail. But it's just it's at least in my opinion, the most customizable yet effective lure that there is.
And if you're listening real quick, you were just holding it up. Luke is holding a 5-inch Alabama Leprechaun jerk shad, soft plastic. It's only found at fishstrong.com. That's a proprietary one to us. It's got infused scent, super easy to rig. It's deadly in the shallows.
Yeah, and rigging it on this is an owner twist lock. In this case, this is a 3/0 size twist lock with a 1/8 ounce weight. The 1/16 works great too, right? 1/16 is better for skipping. This is better for just slinging across grass flats. But it's just good. It just catches fish. But the problem though is when puffers are bad, puffers wreck it, right? Just like all soft plastics, puffer fish will in one cast they'll just bite it in half. And so fortunately, for a lot of people, they don't have many puffers around. Around Tampa Bay, there's a pretty good amount. So just something that we have to be mindful of.
So I'm curious if you guys have the same opinion as I do here about the type of species sort of determining the retrieve as well. I find that redfish close to the bottom, really slow retrieve is pretty much standard across the board, depending on, or not even really dependent on the season, pretty much all year round. If I do a really slow retrieve, couple bounces, long pause, I'm getting more redfish. If I'm trying to go for trout or snook, I do a much more erratic retrieve with a shorter pause. You guys feel the same way there?
100%. I agree with you. It's
sure.
Just anatomy. Trout feet up, redfish feet down, snook feet up. Flounder are the slight exception. They do feet up, but their strike zone is just a couple inches off the bottom, maybe back the foot. So I'm with you.
Very similar to the redfish retrieve when I'm going after flounder.
Yep.
Yeah. But either way, all of us should be, just changing the retrieve speed and tempo. But as White said, we can't, or as I guess Joe said, we can't do an actual survey. Our survey is to actually cast, try it, and then change it the next one. And just keep changing, and you'll eventually find what they're responding to best. And in some cases, like we were just talking about, different species will react to one versus the other.
Yeah. One time we tried to do a survey monkey underwater. It did not work. Yeah. Complete bomb. All right. So covered twitch bait, covered jerk bait. Now let's talk about the crankers. The when do you go to crankbaits, how are you retrieving it?
So it's really rare that I use crankbaits. Like I said, I really just tied it on, and I only have one in my box, and I just kind of keep it on the boat for when I have somebody out with me that, doesn't know how to effectively work a soft plastic, or doesn't know how to effectively work one of those suspending plugs, or whatever we want to call them. They are one of those hard to mess up type of baits. I think there's a lot of baits that outwork them. For sure, if there's a good topwater bite, you can get hit on them, but you have a much better chance using, a topwater spook, or just your average topwater that we show a lot. Looks a little bit like a torpedo, sits on the surface. It's just one of those. The crankbaits are a foolproof way to get somebody on fish, but I don't think that they're as effective as some other baits out there. If you're trying to, imitate some bait fish that are running along the bottom, that you could run one really hard along the bottom. But I would not say they've ever really been my first choice for anything, but I put them on rods for people that don't really have a ton of skill. And even to that same point, I feel like I can do the same thing with Paddletails with even better results, because it does allow them to, if they want to, mix in pauses, which is usually where you're going to get strikes. So I wouldn't almost say that I've entirely phased out crankbaits, with the exception of the wake bait. But even in my personal use, I don't really use the wake bait a whole lot. It just stays with me as one of those things that I can have for somebody else. I wouldn't really recommend anybody have crankbaits, but you can't mess up retrieving straight.
Unless you're a bass fisherman. Save the crankbaits for the ditch pickles. That's the message here. If you have a saltwater tackle bag and a freshwater, keep the crankbaits over here on the freshwater side. Ditch pickles love the crankbaits.
Not so much. Depends on the type of fish.
Oh, now you're going to confuse everybody, Tony.
So if you're fishing, inshore flats and stuff like that, water less than, I'd say, 8 to 10 feet deep, yeah, crankbaits aren't going to be the way to go. Crankbaits to me are more of a deep water structure type of bait. So if you're fishing inlets or you're fishing, deeper canals that have structure on the bottom, and you're tired of casting out jig heads that are getting snagged all the time, the nice thing about crankbaits, I use a lot of these at Sebastian Inlet. This is a Usuri. This is the crystal minnow. Forget the exact term for it, but this goes down to about 15 feet. You can get it down to 15 feet. It'll hit those rocks. It'll deflect off of them. And the nice thing about these types of baits in deep water situations with structure is that if they do, if you feel yourself get snagged, all you have to do is let line out and they'll float out of that structure, and that'll keep you from losing them. So if you are fishing deep water structure current where you're getting snagged a lot, that's where crankbaits can really excel, especially for snook, also redfish, and also flounder, just because they are being worked pretty close to the bottom.
Much that thing set you back a few bucks, huh?
Yeah. I mean, gift cards definitely help if you are trying to buy crankbaits.
Gift cards.
Tony, you're spot on, man. Like, anybody out there that, if you live in a residential canal anywhere in Florida, try trolling a lipped plug on your way out of the canal, especially southwest, southeast, central west, central east Florida, for snook. Talk about like the laziest lure you can have out behind you when you're heading out of your canal, or idle speed. Multiple 30, 32 inch and bigger snook have been caught on a lure just like this. Can be early in the morning, can be later in the afternoon, 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, when those snook decide to head out into the deepest parts of the channel in those residential creeks. I think that it's a great lure to always have in your box. I kind of consider it a Hail Mary. If you like, for me, if I'm trolling back in the kayak from a long day of fishing and there are puffer fish or pinfish that's going to like bite a paddle tail off when I'm trolling back, I'll put out a lip plug if I'm in deep enough water, 4, 5, 6 feet, and there's not a lot of floating grass or debris that this can snag. And that's just kind of my go-to. Like, I just want an 18-inch trout to hit my setup on my way back to the ramp. And, it does have a purpose. I mean, for sure, Tony, like snook fishing, snook that are known for like aggressively short striking or just popping a bait where they might not get the entire paddle tail or weedless presentation in their mouth, whether it's a treble hook or a single hook on a hard bait, you're going to get hooked up. So definitely applicable.
And if you're real lucky, you might even catch a largemouth bass or a tire at the bottom. You never know. All right, let's move on to swim baits. Back up to the very top. Our favorite, definitely our number one search bait. We call them obviously paddle tails. You'll see us talking about Slam Shady paddle tails. When do you guys use that?
All the time.
Every day.
So all like the twitch baits, the stick baits, right? Those require the angler to take action. So it's more of like an intermediate to advanced. Whereas the normal, swim bait / paddle tail, whatever that you want to call it, this is something that everybody can use. This doesn't, the tail itself provides a good amount of action. You can cast it out, do a straight retrieve, right? You can, Joe, when we took Shauna out when she was like 6 at that meetup, we just gave her one of those, taught her how to throw the rod out a little bit, and she was catching trout. She was just doing a straight retrieve, catching trout, straight retrieve, trolling behind a kayak or even a boat will catch fish, or doing a twitch pause too. Or if the fish are being a little bit more lethargic, you can still do the twitch pause and get those, like Wyatt's recent tip.
Yeah, it was a fantastic video. We'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, to get those fish that are kind of following, thinking about it, not yet sure. And then in many cases, when you pause it or if you twitch it, you change the speed. That'll be enough to get them to go ahead and strike it. So to me, that's like the ultimate. That's why I now rarely use the hard plastics, because these paddle tails in particular are just so effective. So what about you guys?
We talk about cheat codes. I think paddle tails are the cheat code for inshore fishing. Like, one of the biggest things I see with people, the biggest mistake I think inshore anglers make is thinking that their bait is the problem. Really, it's oftentimes, are the fish that you're throwing at, are they feeding? And sometimes I'll come across, a small community of fish on a flat that may or may not be feeding. Sometimes I can pick some off, but with paddle tails, you're able to just cover ground more efficiently than any other lure out there. You can retrieve it pretty fast and get the most natural presentation I believe you can at that, high speed that the paddle tail provides with the correct act. We talked about, you have to fish those twitch baits a little bit slower. You can fish them faster, but your presentation takes a hit. With paddle tails, you can fish pretty quickly, cover areas really effectively, and still have, a top-notch presentation. And that's why I think they're a cheat code, because to be a really successful inshore fisherman, if people just follow this tip I'm about to give right here, I promise you will become better. It's just about covering ground, finding the feeding fish, finding that 10%. We talk about the 90-10 rule all the time. If you can cover more ground and find out where that bite's hot with that paddle tail, and it allows you to do that because you can just continue to cover and cover and cover. We talk about the jerk baits, talk about suspending, all these different baits. Paddle tail is going to allow you to fish 2 to 3 times as many areas as you can, because you can have a faster retrieve while keeping up a top-notch presentation. It's really hard to fish them wrong. I've not been in a situation where fish won't hit a paddle tail when they will hit other stuff. If they're feeding, they're typically going to, unless they're keyed in on shrimp per se. But I've ripped off the tails off my paddle tails and twitched them like shrimp and caught redfish. So it's just like, if I want to simplify things, we talk about simplicity and being a specialist. I think paddle tails are just the way to go with inshore fishing. It just allows you to cover ground, be really efficient with what you're doing, and find where the feeding fish are. That's the most important thing out of all this tackle we talked about. Find a lure that you can cover ground quickly and provide a good presentation with, and you will find feeding fish a lot faster.
Justin, do you mind doing the honors of specialize and simplify?
Simplicity, specialist. Simplicity, specialist.
And you know what's interesting? Do you know what's interesting?
What?
Both of those start with an S. Out of the 4 we just talked about, what other one starts with an S? A swim bait, aka the paddle tail. That's all you need. Get rid of the crankbaits, get rid of everything else, and just stick with the old swim baits. And I'm kidding. We obviously, we need a little bit of everything. But what's interesting is, as we've all specialized and simplified, if you look at my tackle bag, the majority of it is paddle tails. Different. We have the Bomber, the Z-Man, Slam Shading, the 2.0. We have some other ones we're playing around with as well. It's such a great way to go out there and cover ground. And even if you got complete newbies on there, it's probably just the best way to start. I mean, yeah, you can still mess it up if you rig it really bad. That's why we have all the videos there to show you exactly how to do it. But man, good job, by the way, Justin. Good segue. What about you, Tony? Luke, swim baits?
Yeah, paddle tails are going to be, in my opinion, probably the most universal bait to throw. They're good for power fishing as a search bait. If you're trying to cover water really quickly, you can also sight cast to them. I mean, the past few trips I've been out, I've been able to just toss it in front of fish and they slam it. So it's great for that. And like everybody else said, it's just very simple to use. If you go out with somebody that isn't very experienced, you can just tell them, cast it out, reel it in. And the only thing that's going to change is how fast you reel it in or how slow you do it. So yeah, they can be used year round. Clean water, clear water, dirty water, shallow water, deep water. They're just a great bait to use all around.
And especially give to a new person, highly recommend something like this compared to like a crankbait. You do not want a newbie throwing around something with treble hooks. You see, we had that one post, was it 100 reasons why not to use treble hooks or something like that? And almost all of them were just treble hooks from like crankbaits, or just people having them embedded in their heads and their arms, their fingers. It's just not worth it, especially with a lot of the fish we catch, we have to release, or we prefer to release them in many cases as well. It's just better for the fish, better for us. And the fact that these are so effective as well, that's why we always stress the importance of using just the simple stuff, paddle tails, or if you are going to use the plugs, just replace those treble hooks with single hooks. It's easy to do. It takes a few seconds, and it'll save a lot of trouble in many cases. It'll save trips to the hospital to get hooks out of yourself.
Almost every story you hear from someone who's had to go to the hospital is usually with a treble hook. I mean, rarely is it just a single, and I know it happens occasionally, but almost all of them are. Oh, whoop, just got an alert. Ooh, I got some breaking news here. 2 pieces of breaking news. Wow, this is great news. Number one, that everything we just talked about here is on our store at fishstrong.com. And if you're a member, you get 20% off. Isn't that awesome? That's at fishstrong.com. The other piece of breaking news is we're accepting new members in the Insider Club. Cool little piece of history here. When Luke and I first started it, it was just the 2 of us and a web person. And it was like truly underground. And, then Tony joined us shortly after. And I mean, it was really just the 3 of us and like a couple hundred members. And you literally couldn't even find it on our site. It was like invitation only. And now we're accepting new members. We have 22. We would now have hate mail if we were hiding it. So it is open, and we'd love to have you in there. We do a lot of really fun content, and we're really starting to pile it on the stuff that you are listening to and you see on YouTube. That's the free stuff. We reserve the very best stuff, especially all the trends, the stuff that Wyatt's been hammering on, the 90-10 zone, putting you in the right spot at the right time based on trends, based on what the weather's doing, and based on the tides and the wind. That's what we reserve for all of our Insider members. That's why we have 22,000 plus people who have said yes to joining the Insider Club. The tackle discounts are amazing. I saw today we have at least 1 member, if not 2, that have spent well over $6,000, because the average saltwater angler spends around $1,580. It's about $1,600 a year just on tackle. That's not kayaks. That's not power poles. That's not all the accessories and boats. That's all separate. That's just fishing tackle. So right there, 1, we're going to show you what you need and what you can avoid. And number 2, 20% off everything, up to 20% off everything in our entire store. And so it's just an easy way to justify the 27 cents per day is all it costs to be a member. And so we'd love for you to join us. Those are 2 pieces of great news. And even if you just want to, support us and buy stuff at fishstrong.com, we love that as well. But I'd love to give you, a discount on it by being a member, joining the family. And of course, the community is just awesome. That's where we're in there all the time. And that's where we're posting all of our insider reports. We're going out fishing every week. That's where the gentlemen here are putting their spot dissections in. I think one of the coolest things is the inner circle. It's what we do every Thursday, where we get on a Zoom call like this, but with all the members. Anyone can join, and we record them, obviously. And you can even send questions in prior. And it's like free coaching. It's like having a fishing guide you can get on a call with and literally just say, hey, here's where I'm going this weekend. What do you guys think? It's as close as you can get to cheating and catching more fish faster. It's pretty awesome. So why don't you guys join us? It's saltstrong.com, Insider Club. It's where it's all happening. It's where we're spending the majority of our time. And we're just having a blast over there. And so we'd love to see you in the club. Guys, anything else?
I think we covered about every lure.
Yeah, it was good.
And all the cheat codes that are in the book as well.
All you can think about is up, down, left, right, start.
AB start.
AB start. Yeah, thank you. Like yeah. It's been a little while.
Old school Nintendo.
Was that Metroid or what? Which one was that?
No,
is that Contra?
Contra. It might have been Contra. Yeah.
That's what's up.
Great.
We're showing our age right now.
You had a Game Genie.
Remember the Game Genie?
Oh yeah.
Why it's like what is this?
Yeah, no. PS2 is what I started with.
Oh my gosh.
PS2. That was, I can't even figure, there were so many buttons. Like the old NES, it was just 2 buttons, right? And a little black up, down, left, and right. Pretty simple. Well, guys, that's one more reason to join us, is we can give you all of our shortcodes to all the best NES games. Come on now, saltstrong.com. We appreciate you. You're still listening. We're going to cut this off and save the rest for our Thursday, our Thursday live Zoom call, the inner circle call with our members. This has been a fun one. And let us know what questions you have. We did this because of a question, from one of our newer members who's getting back into fishing here. And we love stuff like this. So if you have any other ones, let us know. The best place is to go to saltstrong.com in the fishing tips section. That's the blog. And so all those questions come directly to our inbox versus YouTube. It's just out there in the massive intranet. And sometimes we get them, sometimes we don't, because we always, serve our insider members first. And of course, if you're on there, it'll even say that you're a member. So we'll answer your questions first over at saltstrong.com. Up at the top or in the hamburger menu, there's a little fishing tips section. Otherwise, Wayne, we appreciate the question. Hopefully that was helpful. And we'll definitely be doing some more of these very soon. So send in your questions and we'll talk to you guys in the next episode. Gents, great job. Peace. 'Cause fishing, it's in my soul.